I'm only sitting slightly closer to you because the middle is a little bit awkward.
Yeah,
So
that's fine.
I'm like kind of like half a little bit
No,
if it's too
totally.
much. Just
No,
I
it's
found out
fine.
in German they have a word for like the seam in between
The
your
I
cushions
always-
or
space.
two beds that are put together. There's like a word for it.
In English, we call it Jesus.
Huh.
Leave room for Jesus. You never heard
Oh,
that?
no. I
Leave
grew
room
up
for
in
the Holy
a,
Spirit.
That's right. You grew up in a...
No one was saying that in my house.
Honestly, we weren't saying my
Waiting
house
for
either.
Elijah, maybe.
But-
At my high school, they would say, leave room for the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like when you're at dances.
Yes.
Is it like a Catholic school? Or?
Yes.
I see.
Highly. Extremely.
I was at like a heathen public school. So
Nice.
so like people would say it definitely as a joke.
Yes.
Like they're like, yeah.
We also
It's
said it as a
non-ironic.
joke,
Leave
too.
it- yeah, exactly. Listen, Muslims do love Jesus. I just want to.
So he's the
we love
prophet
Jesus.
canon, right?
Yeah. We love Jesus. Jesus, Isa, is the most named prophet in the Quran, more than Muhammad even.
It's the most recent at that point. The other one's been
True. The other one is like
was
live and
the
direct,
influencer.
emergent prophetic influencer.
it was only 700 years or whatever.
Reggie's like, can we please start the interview? I'm just kidding.
More of an easy conversation.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm
That's
wondering,
true.
can we leave that in?
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
do that.
it's very funny. Jesus was an influencer.
Jesus was.
Jesus is.
Jesus is the influencer.
I'm moving to have this cut.
All right, folks. Welcome to the 2.0. I don't know, 2.0.
2.0.
The 2.0 season of Hyphae Leaks. Welcome back. This is our very first live recorded podcast. We have two very esteemed guests here in Oakland, California, downtown at Acoma at the Agenic Church. We got I've said it before, I'm gonna say it again. If I had to pick anybody to be in a foxhole with me, it would be my wonderful co-host right here, Mary Carreon.
Thank you, Reggie. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Happy to be here. Happy to be doing this live. This is the future, Reg, honestly.
I think it was the past, and then now it's the future again.
Here we are.
Right? Because it just used to be live.
You know, and we have, and why do we have all these people who aren't, well, we have one person from Oakland, but we have two people who aren't from Oakland, in Oakland. They're here up for the Shakruna conference that's happening this week. I guess you guys can't do it, but me and Mary can make some noise for our two esteemed guests right here for MAPS. Two guys that are in the middle of all this shit. They've been moving some of the biggest events that we've ever seen. At the helm of one of the most influential, if not the most influential, psychedelic / plant medicine organizations in the space right now. The people who, as far as I know, actually had the first Oakland psychedelic conference years ago. I'm walking in there. Can we please welcome? We got Izzy, Lee, and Kevin Balktick in from MAPS. Can you guys just tell us a little bit about yourself? We have Kevin here, who is the director of Psychedelic Science 2025. Can you just give the folks a little bit?
Hey everyone, glad to be here in Oakland. Looking forward to Shakruna this weekend. I have, to my amazement, been organizing conferences on the topic of psychedelics for 18 years now, going back to 2007, and it's been an honor and a privilege to just be able to do this work and put lots of interesting stuff in front of people.
And we have the policy director and current interim executive director of MAPS, giving all the energy with the hat. Izzy Ali. Hey, tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Reggie, for the invitation. It's great to see you again. Mary, great to be here with you. Great to be here with you, Kevin. I am happy that it's springtime. I'm happy that the sun is coming out and the seasons are changing. I've been at MAPS it'll be 10 years this year.
Wow.
It'll be 10 years this fall.
That's huge.
I started as a volunteer my last year of law school, which is here at Berkeley Law. I grew up in Fresno, California. I've been in the Bay Area for about 12 years. And nowadays living out on the other side of Lake Merritt. So got to take a short drive to get here today, and just glad to be here in person with you, be in conversation.
Yeah, man. This has been, seems like it's been a really big year for MAPS. When I say year, 365 days,
Yeah.
a lot has happened. But it's also been a busy year in particular for you as an individual, you know, coming off of, you know, you got your shirt on for the California Psychedelic Summit, coming off of, you just had that in your hometown of Fresno. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, first off, I want to appreciate Reggie because Reggie surprised me showing up to the event last year. We had our very first one in March of 2024. We had invited Izzy to come speak on a panel about psychedelics and religion. And he shows up with Reggie and they come in and they're like, I'm like, yo, are you gonna get on stage, man? Because like, we got some stuff to talk about. But it was the first event of its kind in my hometown of Fresno, California, which is in the Central Valley, right in between San Francisco and LA. My buddy Keegan Davis, who runs Advanced Behavioral Concepts, a nonprofit down there, and I had been talking about it for like 10 years probably, like slowly, like a little bit. We're like, we should do something in Fresno, gotta do something in Fresno. And then actually after Psychedelic Science 2023, which he came out to, it was his first conference ever.
Wow.
And you can imagine going from zero to an event like that, you know, 12,000 people, like all the events, all the things. He came back and literally a week later was like, we got to do this in Fresno. So we did the first one last year. We just had the second one in Fresno like a month and a half ago. And I got to say, I was inspired by you as well, because like, it's one thing to do what we're doing at MAPS, and we'll talk about that, just like, you know, whole story, all, you know, convention center size. What we're doing in Fresno, what y'all, you know, what you started here, what you were doing in Oakland, it's like, we're starting with like, who's going to show up into this first room right now, and then slowly build out from there. So it's kind of, you got to have both, and that was the kind of the spirit there.
How do you feel that you were received by the community of Fresno?
Yeah, in your hometown, that's huge.
Well, what I'll say is like probably about a third of the attendees that first year were like our family and friends. Thankfully, we have a lot of family and friends, so it was cool because I think a lot of people in our community around us had heard us talk about this stuff. Keegan is he's a substance use disorder professional. He's been working with youth for like 10, 12 years. So we're both like adjacent to the world and have been for a while. And I think that most of our family and friends had just heard us talk about it. And then, you know, slowly over time, you've got, oh, there's something on Netflix, oh, there's something on the news, oh, there's something, and they're like, wait a minute. Because when we started doing some of this stuff 10 plus years ago, everyone was like, good luck, buddy. We trust you, but like, have fun over there. We'll see you back in the real corporate world in a couple of years, you know? So I think that by this time, when we have people around us who are like, and for me at least, you know, you have like elders and people in the community reaching out being like, hey, what's this about the end of life care? What's this about the neurological stuff? So you kind of start to see that expand, and I think that's been really cool because suddenly it's not me being like, guys, have you tried weed before or whatever I was doing when I was 19 to to this, which is like, I don't have to say it. Now we're just like, okay, we're holding space for this conversation that we're all learning a lot of as we go. So that part was really cool.
It's so important for people to start things in their own communities.
Yeah.
Things don't have to start giant. You don't have to have a 5-year plan. But when you start things, you don't know where they lead. And the proliferation of these community events and learning events across the country, across the world, often done by just, you know, community activists, people who want to start a thing in their neighborhood. It's been so important and so rewarding. You know, because we're all learning. You can only do so much online. You can only do so much through the screen. Getting people together in person just never gets old.
Yeah, and Kevin started your stuff like I started, you know, I was doing this in Fresno. Kevin started at Horizons in New York City in like what, 2007 or 8?
2007.
Yeah, so.
I had gone to the Albert Hofmann 100th birthday event in Basel, Switzerland in 2006.
I've heard so much about that.
It was
January 2006.
Same.
It was, you know, a very quiet time. John Hanna had wrapped up his Mind States events, and there was a moment where there was a little dip. They did this huge event in Basel, Switzerland. They gave Albert Hofmann the key to the city, his 100th birthday. He was still alive. And one of the things that was special about that is that it felt official. It felt a part of the world. It was at the Swiss Hotel. There were people running around in like catering tuxedos and simultaneous translation headsets. And instead of the message being, this is underground, this is criminal, this is forbidden, it was like, this is the same conference center that they have government events, pharmaceutical company events, which is big in that town still. Yeah. And that really, all the people whose work I was reading and people I'd heard about, you could go and meet them. I met Sasha and Ann Shulgin. I met Rick Doblin. I met Earth and Fire Airwood. I met many different people who I knew of through the internet, basically.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
This feeling of like optimism and being in the room, and that people there really wanted to have high-level discussion. So I came back to New York, and especially as a young person, I couldn't just jet off to Switzerland every time I wanted to talk to drug nerds. You know, we pulled it together. The first Horizons was very humble. It's not what it was now. And I wanted it to be somewhere that also had like a feeling of dignity and respect. And I was looking for venues, and someone told me that there was this beautiful church on Washington Square Park that had just hosted the Anarchist Book Fair.
Nice.
And I was like, well, my
Love
ideas
that.
are less dangerous than that.
Seriously.
And I kind of walked in the door, and at Judson Memorial Church, they had hosted like Yoko Ono and Twyla Tharp's like radical dance performances in the 70s. They run a healthcare clinic for immigrants. They're a very politically engaged church. And they basically said yes to it. You know, there wasn't really a budget for much of anything. We had, you know, who can find a place to stay in New York City and come down from Boston or up from DC. We kind of cobbled it together, but we found that a lot of people were looking for this, and it just wasn't out there because at the time, the level of concern about law enforcement, criminality, if I attend an event that's about psychedelics, am I going to be investigated? How do you know the event isn't full of undercover law enforcement? Is it safe to use a credit card to buy a ticket? 20 years ago, that was very much the climate. And I was young and didn't have a career to lose. So I was like,
Let's go.
I'm willing to bet that the law enforcement in New York City is just busy with other stuff that weekend. And we had this beautiful event that just proved it out, that there were a lot of people who wanted community. They wanted knowledge. They wanted to learn. They didn't want to live in fear. But it really started as like an art project, a community project, a DIY project at a time when things were very quiet and people were living in fear.
I can't, to be completely honest, I can't imagine coming out in public doing events 18 years ago. You know, we were just talking off camera or off mic about when Oakland decrimmed. And
May 2019?
yeah,
Is that right?
yeah,
Or June 2019.
June 2019.
Denver was May, and then Oakland was like a month and a half later.
And you know, it was right before the pandemic, but people were, I remember there was the Haven that was right down the street that for me it was like the best of times because there's finally this one place. Before this, I was just like you, or no, because you were out doing events, but when you were talking about everything was online, you know, I'm in Shroomery, I'm in Arrowwood, and these are all, you know, I'm learning from people, PF Tech, I'm learning through all these people through the internet. And finally, there's a place in my town that I can go and meet everybody.
And it's the spot.
Everybody, it was so good. But we can talk about that later. We are here to mainly talk about what you are organizing now, MAPS Psychedelic Science 2025. Last year, Mary and I did a piece talking about the expenses, mainly the expenses and access of MAPS 2023. And we interviewed Izzy, we interviewed Devin, and we interviewed a few other community members. Earlier this year, I think it was like the second or the third day of this year, you and I had a pretty pleasant conversation. I remember, I think Hanukkah was like just ending or something like that.
December in Las Vegas.
Yeah, okay.
All places.
That is nice.
Oh, no, I'm actually talking about after that.
The phone call. Yeah.
So we met in Vegas.
November, maybe.
And in November at Remind.
Yep.
And then we had a phone call.
Yeah.
And during that phone call, we just had
It was pretty good.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a frank conversation just about, you know, lessons that we may have learned from last time and how you envision MAPS 2025 going forward. After the conversation, I'm like, damn, we should have recorded that. And so this is why we brought you guys here. I'd like to open that piece of the conversation, and we'll come back to talking about MAPS, but I'd like to open that piece of the conversation just with a very simple, if you could, describe what psychedelic science, what psychedelic science is. You know, on the name, it sounds like, you know, I might need, you know, a science degree or a chemistry degree or something to participate.
Or to understand.
Or to understand. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, so MAPS held its first conference in 1989 called Psychedelics in the 90s, I believe. I was not there because I was born too late, and they would have been wheeling me around in a stroller or whatever. But the psychedelic science kind of tradition goes back to 2009. The first one was in San Jose, and then the subsequent to 2012 and 2017 were held over here at the Oakland Marriott. So MAPS, I really like that it is committed to all of the pathways of access for safe, responsible, beneficial use of psychedelics. MAPS supports, most famously, the medical pathway. It supports the pathway of religion and spirituality, which in the United States is very unique and different than most countries. It also supports people's right to use psychedelics privately in peer communities for their own benefit and enjoyment. So of those kind of pathways, and I guess we should also mention, of course, the new state-regulated pathways in Colorado and Oregon and, perhaps New Mexico, but the dialogue that reaches the most people in the world, the most people in America are comfortable understanding and listening to, is about science and medicine. And the thing that has changed and opened the largest number of minds to this over the last decade or 20 years, and MAPS opened its IND for MDMA in 2001, I believe, is when they began the investigation of new drug, pardon me. So MAPS began its adventure with the FDA formally researching MDMA for PTSD in 2001. But the thing that really changed people's attitudes on the largest scale out in the world about this was, a decade of newspaper headlines, 60 Minutes, TV show news segments, NYU, Johns Hopkins, PTSD, veterans, professionalized therapy and professionalized medicine. A lot of people still understand and respect those institutions. People trust doctors. They trust people who want to be therapists. They trust the institutions of science. So in trying to bring people in to this discussion about what does a future look like where people have access to psychedelics in a safe way to use responsibly for beneficial purposes, this dialogue of science is one that the largest number of people have respect and openness for. And what we often find is that people start on this pathway, professional therapy is what they're seeking or interested in. And once they spend more time in the community, they meet more people, often they have their own experiences, they start seeing the other pathways and the other things there. But to a large extent, it's about meeting people where they're at. MAPS is very committed to science, medicine, research, the tools of empirical knowledge to really validate to people whether or not you've had these experiences yourself. We can prove to you, we can really demonstrate that there is value here, that it can be safe, and that the benefits can be extraordinary. So we're in pretty deep now with the psychedelic science team. There's a question to, if we were going back in time, would we call it something different? Would we theme it differently? But we still see at that event, the largest number of attendees are therapists, medical and mental health professionals, people who really want to spend their life helping people and are hoping that this can be the future of their career. But on balance, we dedicate about half of the stage content to science, medicine, therapy, and then half to also everything else.
A whole bunch of other stuff.
Policy, peer usage, indigenous topics, philosophy,
Risk
arts,
reduction,
creativity,
culture and society.
harm reduction, history. It is something for everyone and kind of the biggest tent. And even though the name has science in it, we really want everyone to come. And we do have something for everyone. And I also want to say that one of the things I actually love about this field is that it's a world in which scientists and therapists have actually become like rock stars. And you have people who aren't scientists, who didn't receive any formal training or education in science, that they still admire and want to learn from top quality scientists, people who are doing really rigorous, important work that are respected by policymakers, that are respected by people who don't normally know or seek out these things. And we have a community of scientists and therapists that are not just trying to stay in the ivory tower, and it can be very ivory, but they want to reach people. They want ordinary people to know that science, medicine, therapy, these discussions are for everyone, not just gate-kept for a small group of people.
Can I add a quick thing about just like
Go
the
for it.
framing is like one thing I like to think about, because I think about this a lot. It's like, especially because by the time I got to MAPS, the psychedelic science event was already not just science, already by then, you know? And I think a lot about the name Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. All those words are important, multidisciplinary. So I like to think, okay, we're starting by, and it's kind of what Kevin was saying, it's like we're starting by thinking, what are the ways in which people who are usually in this silo of like science and research and medicine, my brother was a researcher, and like when they're in there, that's like the world that they're in.
Totally.
And you've probably all seen, and as someone who works, you know, when you're talking about like whether it's the analysis, the testing, once you get to that level of like this analytical chemistry, and you're trying to communicate it to the consumer, there's a whole like layer of translation. You've both done that before. So I think first about this multidisciplinary thing. Okay, how are we crossing the kind of silos of information first? Okay, association. We're all out here like in this relationship, in you know whether it's coalition or community, depending on what's going on at the time. Who knows? And then I like the word studies a lot because to me studies are a lot of things. I study a lot of things. You know, some of it is science, some of it is law, some of it is just like how do we work in the world? How do we take care of each other? So I always try to think of the whole thing. It's psychedelic science under this umbrella of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, where science, to Kevin's very good point, is like in, you know, for sure 1989, but like even 2010, even 2013, even the first few years of this conference, 2017, like it's true that even though I think that a lot more people than our scientists are actually paying attention to it already or kind of bought it and already into it, they've just been like waiting for someone to do something so that their family members don't think that they're crazy or whatever, you know? So I think to Kevin's point, like bringing this kind of focus on science and medicine, suddenly it's like validated by all these people who other people are paying attention to, allows people who maybe the science matters to them, maybe it doesn't, but what they're getting out of it, whether it's the benefit or the experience, whatever, really matters. It's something that they personally experienced. They don't even know the chemistry. It doesn't matter to them. Suddenly it's like, oh, those people are saying it, so I can tell my version of the story too. And we see a lot of that kind of like, okay, now there's room for this conversation in a way that there hadn't been.
I was gonna say that it creates room. It creates.
It's all about creating room.
It creates space. Yeah, it creates space. Also, it feels very on brand because the content of psychedelic science is inherently multidisciplinary. So there we go.
It's also important to remember this is a field where for decades the public was given inaccurate, harmful information. Decade upon decade, all of the popular wisdom and knowledge about psychedelics was inaccurate, harmful
Propaganda.
for such a long time that it's forgotten now that we've had such a good streak of people, you know, becoming more open to this and learning through the media, including the public media, the mainstream media, that psychedelics can hold benefit and can be used safely. But when we were starting out on this path, you know, in 2009 at the early psychedelic science events, there was still, this was pre-Michael Pollan, it was definitely pre-Oprah.
Oh my God.
One of the struggles we were still in at that time was how do we just get people to take us seriously? And we want them to know the actual facts that are validated by science. And we've been so successful, I think, as a movement over the last decade that people often forget how bad this was as little as 10 years ago.
That's real.
Right.
That's real. I was at the retreat in Santa Cruz last weekend, and James Fadiman, Dr. James Fadiman pulled up, and I love hearing him speak. And he stood up in front of the crowd and he was like, man, you guys want to talk about taking risks. You have no idea what it was like when I started out. And so to your point, you know, my parents, when I told my parents this is what I was going to do, I didn't talk to my mother for a year and a half until, you know, until she saw something somewhere. And she was just concerned because she didn't want me to get in trouble, that's all. So, all right, thank you guys for framing actually what psychedelic science is. I'm gonna ask one more, then I'm gonna pass it off to see what you got, Mary. But,
Great.
you know, one of the big things about last year that was discussed in my communities, and I think that I do a pretty good job of spanning, you know, across communities. Yes, Black people, but yes, women, and yes, POC. Just a lot of shit. I'm here with We got the token white behind the camera right now.
Reggie, I got to say, just I was just saying, you've done a really good job over the last years of like being in contact with a lot of folks. You have as well. I mean, just like you got to be in dialogue, or we just get lost in sauce. Anyway, keep going. I just want to say that. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I come to this from political organizer background, and in politics, they say there are no permanent allies and no permanent enemies. And as I get older in my life, it just feels a lot easier to keep open channels of communication as opposed to walking around with the beef, just. So I'm asking all this to say, last year within these communities, the number one conversation I was having was, it's so fucking expensive. And it's in the middle of the week. Off camera, we just had a little conversation about it being in the middle of the week. I want you to touch on that. But can we talk about what you learned from 2023 and what it's going to look like in 2025 and why?
Yeah, and to just start with accessibility, pricing, what you're getting for it, things like that. I can speak to this a little. So one of the beautiful things about this era is that there are learning, networking, community, psychedelic events all over the country at all kinds of price points. You have free or sort of nominal cost, gatherings, weeknights and weekends at places like this and other community centers. Sometimes you have smaller meetings and conferences that are more affordable, closer to home, and everything sort of in between. This event is biennial. We do it once every other year at this point. We did 2023, now we're doing 2025. There's already a discussion about 2027. It's a big thing. It's at a convention center, and it's designed to be the biggest, widest, largest tent. And it's also designed to be kind of a statement to the world that this is a topic worthy of dignity, it's worthy of respect, it's worthy of the same kinds of events that other, whatever you want to call them, fields of study, industries, communities, movements have. There are some inescapable costs of doing an event this large anywhere, basically. And MAPS is a charity. This event is not profitable. MAPS's purpose is not to make money. It's to pursue our mission. And until such a time as we see a mature, growing world in which more and more people can be employed and have businesses working in this field, these events are going to continue to be subsidized basically by philanthropy, the MAPS treasury. So when people see the price points for these events, they really reflect the cost of doing an event this large in an event like a convention center, which is the only place you can really have an event this large, and that no one is really profiting from it. And we also don't have the benefit of the kinds of sponsor support that you would normally have in other industries. When they have a giant conferences for attorneys, they're having no trouble finding a whole world of law firms to write big sponsorship checks that basically pay for the event. And while the psychedelic community has some business, it has some drug developers, it's nowhere near a global mature industry. Like last year, the event that was at the convention center before ours was called Outdoor Retailer. And it's basically every sports company and sports store in the entire world.
I didn't even know this.
They decide, they go there, they have this huge meeting where everyone has their new outdoors products out. Everyone who runs a sports store in the country goes to it. And that's how the thing is paid for.
Yeah.
Are they all wearing pants like this? Did you
No.
get this at the outdoor? Okay.
These are vintage. They're from,
Okay.
they're from
nice.
eBay. They don't make
These
them
are
anymore.
Before, yeah, this is before. Okay, sorry.
They make all the new
before
pants
the
have
outdoor
plastic
retailer
in it.
conference.
These are real denim.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Old days.
we're charging the minimum price we can that actually just pays for the cost of a venue this large, having an army of thousands of people that work there for it. It is a union facility, meaning that every person who works in catering or for AV or tech or security, all of those people have a living wage, and a whole team of people who work on this event, for almost 2 years to make it happen. And when you compare it to other events of this size, they mostly cost similar to this, $200, $300, $400 a day. So our community rate, we think, is a really respectful thing where it's competitively priced. It's just the cost of the product we have to ask people for. MAPS does not profit from this. This is not how MAPS makes money. And separate from that, we have, I think, the largest scholarship registration program in the history of psychedelics. where we're this year going to be doing 1,000 or more scholarship registrations. And that's larger than most conferences on this topic, period, full stop. The things that we unfortunately don't have a lot of control over is the cost of lodging. Denver in June's a very popular place, and we have to have this event somewhere. To be able to do this event in LA or the Bay Area or New York or DC or Chicago, believe it or not, this event would have to be twice as large by revenue to afford those kind of venues and the cost of labor in those kind of cities. So Denver is actually a relatively affordable place to produce the event. The hotel rooms are actually less expensive than if we were doing this in a coastal city with a larger population center. You can get a flight there from everywhere. And we only wish we could do more for people and make it even more accessible, because our goal is to get people there, build the movement, get knowledge in people's hands, get relationships. This is not something we do for profit, but we physically would not be able to do the event if we asked less from people. And we only do it once every other year, and that hope when people come, they get benefit from it that makes it worthwhile. But yeah, we know what a week of hotels costs, and we only wish it could be more accessible, but this is the best we're able to do.
And why do you pick the weekdays?
Part of it is because people have different needs for when they can attend these things. You have the number one kind of person. About half of the attendees at these events are people who are in therapy. They're a mental or medical health professional. Maybe they're a social worker or a nurse. And for those people, this is part of work, and that on their weekends, they actually need to be with their families and they have other kinds of commitments. You also sometimes have scheduling issue with these venues, where when you use the weekends for show days, your load out schedule will then go into a Monday and Tuesday, and you have a challenge with the following events. These venues actually have to be booked years in advance. If you want a good month at a big convention center, you're actually reserving this place years out, because their
Like
calendar is
2+
booked
years for sure.
52 weeks a year. And getting an event that spans a weekend can be tough. And for the largest group of people who do come to this, it's part of their professional life, and their preference is often to spend their weekend with their family.
I will say, for what it's worth, because I was at the conference in 2017 here. I actually came by the conference in 2013, just kind of like peeked around. But I went to the one in 2017 and went between 2017 and 2023 when the decision was getting made to move to Denver. I felt really, because I was already in the Bay by that point, and I was like, so why can't we keep it in Oakland? Like, well, why can't we keep it in the Bay? And then you look at the numbers and you're like, oh, we really can't keep it in the Bay. Okay, it's like, I mean, you know, we know that,
If you pay
but
Bay
it's like,
Area rent, it makes sense. I remember last year hearing you guys toss around the idea of New Orleans, and I'm like,
I know.
That would have been wild.
This is more at your desk, but another thing that we have in Colorado that is
Oh yeah,
amazing
that's right.
is the policy environment.
Yeah.
We
Right,
had
that whole thing.
Yes, the
the
laws.
governor of Colorado
Yeah.
He
opened the
attended,
conference.
yeah.
He didn't attend. He opened the conference. We had the president of the state senate spoke. We had the chief of police on stage speaking. With DCRIM and the Natural Medicine and Health Act, Colorado offers a level of safety and comfort that I just don't think we're going to find in other kinds of states where we can do this event. And that means a lot to us, that the people coming to this event feel like we're doing it at a place that is supportive and it's safe for them to talk about this and attend. And that's worth a lot.
I do want to add the asterisk, as like, I'll just take this hat off, attorney hat on real quick. All state, local, and federal laws apply inside the convention center. So to be clear, it is a more general, it's definitely a more amenable environment. And because you've got government and regulatory and law enforcement people who are in the conversation, I was just with a number of them, like they're thinking about how do we do this responsibly. It is also the case that on site at the convention center, there are a bunch of rules. So just want to say that.
There are also more interesting places to use drugs than a convention center full of PowerPoint
Yeah,
presentations.
that's for
I remember
Hyphae After Dark.
I had heard about this psychedelic conference that's supposed to be taking place in Oklahoma, and I'm like, yeah, good luck getting me there. For the reason, it's
Yeah.
like, yo, just because you can do it there.
I love that. I love that that's happening, and I just like, I hope that they're safe and responsible. I'm sure they're doing other things, but that is a milestone alone. You know?
And you went to Abu Dhabi last year for a mental health event there.
Yeah, I mean, just that was about a year ago. It's actually why I grew my beard out, because I was like, okay, we're gonna go to UAE. Rick was invited to speak at the fourth annual Integrative Mental Health Conference in Abu Dhabi, which by itself is like, wow, okay, that's cool. And I won't go into all of it, but basically the UAE, the Emirates are in a period of time of like bringing a lot more attention to all kinds of health interventions, including mental health, and like everywhere in the world, like the pandemic really accelerated awareness of that. So like, yeah, I mean, the fact that we were having that conversation out there itself was fascinating, and it wasn't just that conversation. It was like the the Minister of Mental Health of Abu Dhabi was there, like in the full gear, like in the government
kill
role.
you for drugs over there?
So I won't go into it because this is too long of a conversation. But no, not anymore. No, there's been actually quite a big shift, and it's different in different parts of even that country, even other places. So I don't want to like try to generalize. But what I'll say is that in many places around the world, this conversation started 10 plus years ago at the UN level. In many places around the world, it has become clear that drugs are a health issue, not a criminal issue. So actually, a lot of places, including the Middle East, which everyone thinks is so aggressive in some ways, and maybe it is in some ways, also, and you see this in South America, you see this in Europe, you see this in a lot of places, they are saying that we should look at health mechanisms, whether it's substance use disorder, whether it's treatment, mental health, that kind of stuff. So those advances, while we're very slowly to getting to them, even here in the United States, a lot of places around the world, including there, has started to kind of move in that direction. Again, how enforcement goes, what actually happens, whole other game, but just in general, I was quite surprised to see both interest and kind of openness from the government, and also people still have to be really careful. I don't want to like America wash that or whatever. I don't want to oversimplify it. Like, sure.
But it's another example of the dialogue of science and medicine really being a place you can meet other people, in the public health sort of science where you can prove if you're just looking to prevent harm in your population, the criminal justice system is a poor way to do it. You won't get the outcomes you want. You're going to cause more harm. And that a medical or health approach to policy is one you can prove to people and you can demonstrate has benefits. And then in the system of medicine, you can explain to people this is a thing you can use as a therapy to help people who are struggling within a medical system. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing that there are more countries in the world, more people in the world are ready to receive that than the other totally legitimate and very interesting pathways of access to psychedelics.
I mean, I appreciate that the dialogue is open. I am happy to hear that some of the countries over there in the Middle East are, because I always thought it was draconian, but Mary.
I mean, just having the conversation, the fact that they're just having the conversations out there, I think is a really beautiful thing. Just like there across the world, obviously there needs to be some kind of relaxation on some of these things, and I feel like through conversation and through gatherings is how that happens. So it's cool that they also had Rick out there to have that conversation. Also, I know that there was a lot of contention around just like Maps being there, Rick speaking there. It was just last year in general was a really contentious time in the psychedelic space.
I mean, there's a lot to say, and without getting into specifics, what I'll say is I feel like last year, and maybe this is a good transition for this conversation, I really felt like in the early pandemic days, there was this, because it was kind of like people were holding back, this thing was bubbling up. And then the first couple of years, there was kind of like, okay, we're here now, and all the things expanded really fast, and everyone's online because suddenly you can do everything, and And I feel like part of what last year was for Maps, for the entire field, for like this conversation, was kind of, and I see it as kind of a level setting. Like there was a little bit of a hype bubble, maybe more than a little bit, and then I sort of see what's happening now as like the movement is reaching its own carrying capacity. It's not ahead of itself in where it can be and what it can do. It's like, okay, we have a certain amount of people, time, work to do. Like, let's do it at the pace that we can, at the rate that we can, because I think without that, like, we're not gonna, I think without that, like, we're not gonna be able to stay sustainable in a long-term kind of way, because a lot of us see this as a sort of multi-generational conversation. I feel like last year was okay, we can't just burn out after one round of this work.
Yes.
20 years is a good amount of time, but we got to keep going even longer than that, even beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely feel that way. How is this kind of maturing of Maps, maturing of the movement reflected in this 2025 psychedelic science?
Well, I can speak a little bit to it. So I think one of the big lessons that MAPS really has started to reflect on over the last couple of years especially is that when the organization started, when Rick started in the 80s and then certainly built it up in the 90s, early 2000s into the research, there was very little of other kinds of things happening in that direction. I don't want to say nothing because there was all kinds of interesting stuff happening in the underground and above ground. And I think this event you were talking about in Basel in 2017 is a good sign of like, okay, that was like 2006. I'm sorry, I meant 7 and then I said 17. Anyway, 2006. Thank you. So almost 20 years ago. But with that said, like especially in the United States, like it kind of had. I think there was a sort of feeling that it had to do everything. And in some ways that's reflected well because you get to this conversation where you've got this kind of early conversation about psychedelic science, the event, this multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Suddenly we have this big tent, big umbrella where we can talk about kind of anything we want.
Yeah.
And that's where it started. Like again, to Kevin's point, like it started with the science, it started with the medicine, the research, because it had to, and because that's also an important thing that kind of gives people the space we were talking about. And then over the last 10 years or so, we've seen this massive expansion in the types of projects and the types of communities they're getting at, in the span of communities that are being contacted and are being brought into this conversation. So suddenly we're in a place, maybe not so suddenly, it's taken some time, where MAPS isn't the organization that has to do everything or tell all the stories anymore. Suddenly there's all these other people around doing all kinds of cool stuff. The ecosystem is now populated with all kinds of interesting people and projects. So I think that MAPS is going through this this stage of growth where it's like, oh, we can kind of reimagine our relationship to the field. What is really needed right now? Before, what was needed was someone to say anything.
True.
And now we're like, whoa, there's all these people doing all this cool stuff. And that's kind of, I see MAPS in general kind of moving toward that direction of being like, what is most needed for the field right now? How can we best support? With respect to the conference, it's kind of, I feel like it's sort of the best of both worlds because we both have this like super big tent perspective that we've had from like the old days, which is like, we got to be able to talk about everything: culture, religion, art, spirituality, of course, science, medicine, research, all that stuff. But like, there's a lot going on here. And also, because there's so many people, and maybe this is reflected in the way that we did the conference this year, last year, 2 years ago, most of the conference programming was curated more or less in-house. Like we had our own crew. We figured out who do we think is important, what are the topics, what are the conversations, kind of pulled it together. This year we basically reversed it. We put out a call for submissions in the fall, got 1,600 submissions for like 300 slots or something. We had a hard time. We could only accept about 20%, or I don't know if it's 15 or 20% total, which is, and what that meant to me, I was like, oh yeah, we don't have to make all the things up and do all the stuff. We just asked what's interesting to you all.
Did AI review those?
No, we did by hand.
We actually need like an AI.
Yeah, if anyone
probably
knows,
there are
if you
things we
got
should be
a
using AI
brilliant
for.
AI tool for this, like,
Yeah.
no, we did that by hand, one line at a time, and we're just now finishing it up at this point. But I just say that to say we got to best of both worlds. We're like, okay, we can still play this big tent kind of role, and also like it can be filled by people in the community, which is what's happening.
Right.
So I'm excited about that.
99% of content at the conference is not about MAPS in-house projects,
easily,
and it's
easily.
always been that way.
We actually had to figure out the 1%. Like, oh, we should probably add our story here.
Yeah, almost everything
Right.
at the conference comes from everywhere else. There is a very small percentage of MAPS people talking about MAP stuff. It is really something we are platforming everyone doing everything, and that's its true purpose. I'll also just say as a thing is like, you watch the time flow and that things get harder the closer you get to your goals. Sometimes they're
For
hardest
sure.
after
Listen to the
you
event,
reach your goal. And that when there's no money, people don't argue about money because there isn't any, and it just solves that problem.
Everyone's there because they want to be
When
there.
there is no legislature that's actually going to pass a bill decriminalizing or creating regulation for psychedelics, you get to go out and envision what the perfect legislation would look like that it achieves all of your goals. But once you're in it and people are actually willing to work with you, then you actually have to play politics and figure out what is going to pass, what are we going to push for. If we do this now and don't include it, will we ever get a chance again? When you're close to actually entering systems of regulation, whether medicine or otherwise, and you have to really figure out what are the minimum safety requirements, what are going to create problems, are we going to be able to include religious use or other kinds of use, how far can we push parts of a decriminalization bill? it's easy to talk about it when they're ideas and you're writing books and pamphlets about what the perfect thing would look like. When you get close to your goals or you achieve your goals and then have to implement them, stuff gets harder.
Totally, yes.
It's like really fun at first.
The whole thing changes. The operations change.
And there's a lot of that in the field right now. It's like, oh, we're getting a lot of what we asked for and dreamed about.
And now what?
And it turns out that it gets harder.
At what cost?
Totally.
I may have missed it, but we had the OG Izzy just step into the room.
We had a camera. What's up?
I had to let him. But I felt like we were turning a corner to touch on something that I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't. We mentioned Rick Doblin and you in Abu Dhabi, and I didn't hear about any controversy, but there has been within the last year a transition of leadership. Just 30,000 feet. Can you guys touch on? I'd like 3 things. I'd like what's happening between Lycos and Maps. Like what is the difference of the two? Because I think that there's a difference, but I don't think that it's very clear.
Speak a little bit to that.
I'd like to understand how Rick relates to either Maps or Lycos, because I'm reading things, about him taking it back. I don't know, and we got you guys right here. And then lastly, can we touch on, and I'll leave it here, but lastly, can we touch on what the future of this interim looks like?
Yeah. I'll go more or less in that order to start, and then Kevin has a lot of perspective, so I'd love to hear. So I'm going to give a super accelerated history of Maps and Lycos because there's a lot out there, and the basic story is that in 2014, really 2013, but 2014 is when the launch was, Maps launched a for-profit, wholly owned subsidiary, Maps Public Benefit Corporation, that housed the research for the MDMA PTSD work. That entity grew over time, and after about 10 years, about a year ago, at the beginning of last year, it kind of, you could say, grew out of its original skin. It kind of molted into its next phase. And for the first 10 years of that, it was wholly owned by Maps, and we raised philanthropic dollars to fund that research in the public interest. At the beginning of last year, it shifted the investment structure such that external investors came in to take ownership of a part of that entity. Maps retained ownership of it, a partial ownership of it. And then over the last year, it's continued to move in that direction with kind of what is the future of the ownership structure and so on. So the main kind of detail to share is that it used to be wholly owned. It's now partially owned by Maps, but now partially owned by other investors. And at the beginning, there was like a really close relationship between the two orgs because they worked very closely. There's like a lot of shared resources and stuff and so on. And over that 10 years, I got to Maps, so it started 2013, 2014. I got to Maps in 2015, 2016. And even then, there was like, we were still like really, really in constant conversation relationship over the few years, which is natural for this kind of corporate form where you have kind of a hybrid for-profit, nonprofit situation. Maps was not the first to do it, but it's a relatively new concept, kind of last like 10, 15 years. It's really kind of picked up in other places. You started to see naturally kind of more separation, both because you kind of see where the expertise of a pharmaceutical company that's trying to put a drug through the FDA requires more and more and more refinement and specialization and expertise. And that's kind of the direction that Maps BBC, renamed Lycos at the beginning of last year, is now really focused on. They're like, we are doing the pharma thing through the FDA, through the regulated process. And that's been just one last thing. And that's been cool for, it's a lot of movement, it's growing pains, it's all this stuff, but it's been cool for Maps. And this, I'll come back to this with your last question, because I feel like Maps started as a nonprofit, multidisciplinary studies, big picture, what's the whole tent, has been really focused on, and in some ways like laser focused on this MDMA for PTSD work, which is important, but it's just part of the story. So I'll segue a little bit more into that in the future.
Chime in on a
please,
couple Lycos things.
Yeah, there's some details.
A lot of people have the questions, why did it happen? Why did you need a company? Why didn't you do this in the not-for-profit? Why didn't you form another not-for-profit? And the reasons for that are numerous. The first one is actually related to Maps being quite so multidisciplinary. We do policy work, we do advocacy work.
Maybe.
We have a founder and president who goes on stage and says he believes that all kinds of drugs and drug use should be decriminalized and just a matter of health and not criminal justice. Drug companies are hyper-regulated in every kind of way. And you can't really have one organization that is both doing the work to create a prescription medicine that's going to work with the FDA and become a product that people will be able to prescribe, and then also be doing policy work where you're trying to change the structure
The advocacy.
of drug laws in
Yes.
this country. And the speech of drug companies is one of the things that is regulated. And if you are making very optimistic statements about the area that your drugs are in as a company, that can create regulatory problems. If you're doing policy work in the area of your drugs and your medicines, that creates regulatory problems. So that was one reason why a separate organization needed to be created, because to do all of the other kinds of work that MAPS does, that company could not also be a pharmaceutical drug company creating a prescription medicine. Separately, there was simply an issue of money. When it looks like we're actually going to get some of what you ask for, and we're going to have a chance at this research going all the way through phase 3 and maybe becoming a prescription medicine, it starts requiring enormous amount of money to finish the studies. And then, if you get what you ask for, to do the work of bringing this into the market so that doctors and therapists can actually prescribe it. It's very expensive, and it was pretty clear that no one really knew whether that money philanthropically from donors was going to be enough. And that's one of the reasons that, kind of as a hedge initially, it was put in a shell of a public benefit corporation, so that if it was not possible to raise enough money from donors to complete this work, it would have the option of turning to investors to do so. Because the thing that would have been the most tragic was that the science was good, it looked like there is a chance at approval, and then you run out of money, and all of the philanthropy money that went to date into this would have then been wasted because it was all housed in a not-for-profit that could not accept the largest kind of source of money that's available in the world, which is investor money and not philanthropic money. It's also worth adding that no member of MAPS, including Rick, is personally a partner or owner in Lykos, the drug company.
Yeah.
The money, if it ever becomes profitable, can only flow into the not-for-profit for charity activities. There is no individual at MAPS that earns $1 personally on whatever happens with Lykos. The goal is to make it so that if Lykos does become profitable, or whatever happens that generates cash, it flows back into the not-for-profit, and then we can use it for charitable activities. It's never been a goal to enrich any individual on the MAPS side.
I feel like that's a lot of very important nuance that I don't think a lot of people understand. I mean, how could they? How could they?
Most people don't spend their days forming experimental for-profit
Right.
drug companies.
Sure.
I also want to add that most people, do you know what most people do when they have nice research for a drug product?
Go public.
Or they just sell it to
I was gonna say
Pfizer,
they
Johnson
sell.
and
Yeah,
Johnson,
they
or
sell.
some giant company. That is the
Yes.
normal thing to do.
Yes.
You get to stack cash. You don't have to do all of this work. Even this experiment of trying to form a values-aligned drug company is kind of an art project on its own. In this situation, almost anyone who's holding a quality product that's making its way through research, they're just going to sell it to someone else who's the highest bidder, and MAPS didn't want to do that.
Well, it's also interesting because it's not, MAPS has a unique product. It's not just MDMA, it's also therapy. It's both. So that's a unique thing for the pharmaceutical industry in general that really is bending the rules, kind of changing things, because that's not how typically pharmaceutical companies work with drugs.
I had learned about, I had actually heard about MAPS for the first time in 2005, like you, on the internet, like just like learning
Yeah.
about stuff. Came back around to when I was in law school 10 years later, and these two things were the things that were, in fact, like in the early days, I was like, actually, this like format modality is almost more interesting than the drug part. Because, and don't get me wrong, drugs are fascinating.
They're great.
They're a fascinating topic. There's so much in there. But thinking about like what does it take to have kind of regulatory structural change at this legal level, and I think Kevin's point is really important, that like there are kind of lines that are drawn by the current kind of regulatory system, by the law and so on, and understanding how to relate to those lines. And I think this is part of what attracted me to policy and advocacy in general as a field is like, okay, because I went to, you start by thinking about the fact that there are rules. And then you get to the reality, and maybe whether it's psychedelics or just looking at it closely enough, you kind of get to this realization that like people make the rules.
Totally.
And that we're all people and that we can change the rules. Of course, there like takes kind of coalition building and political horse trading and like all the savviness and the strategy takes time and energy and effort, and it's like not guaranteed. But I just say that to say that like part of this story and part of this thing about maps, and maybe this is a good transition to the second part of your question, Reggie, is that even when something is pushed underground or asked to stay on the side or kind of marginalized kind of conceptually by society in all these different ways, that like there are tools we can use, not just psychedelics, but also like relationship, coalition building, community building, community organizing and movement building that allows us to like actually change the fabric of reality, really just like change the regulatory system and the laws that like feel like the fabric of reality when you're someone who's subject to them.
In it, yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
So to your question, Reggie, and to like this next thing, which is like what's up with the future? I mean, I see maps in this very, very important kind of liminal space of transition. I was saying earlier about how initially it was like, okay, we got to do literally everything all the time. We got to figure out how to make it all work. And there was a lot of good movement in that direction. A lot of people were kind of attracted to this, you could say this sort of magnetism or center of gravity that it kind of allowed for. And where we're at now is, okay, the field has like totally expanded. There's all of these amazing places, up, down, left, and right. You were talking about a conference in Oklahoma. I did a conference in Fresno, California a month ago. Like things are changing. We were there in all these places in the world. And I think what's happening now, and where I'm seeing and what I think is happening just at MAPS, is this sort of like reflection, what does it really want to do in the future? So the current status is that I'm sure that this will come out by then, but actually on Monday, my colleague Betty Aldworth, who's the Director of Communications, and myself, Director of Policy, were both put into a position of co-interim executive director, where we will be, over the period of time, that a search is happening for a permanent executive director that's ongoing right now. And we'll see how it shakes out. So I think it's kind of a bi-directional thing where MAPS is figuring out what does its strategy need to be, who's out there who might be able to help lead it, and what is that going to look like in the future.
All right, so really quickly, thank you for all that. And I'm sure I got your number. We'll bring you back for more as things go. But as one thing that I really care about in the space is, we said it earlier, diversity. I'd like to talk, when we come back, to talk about diversity and how you're including it in the in psychedelic science. But I think it's very appropriate for the conversation we're having right now. I'm looking around the world of psychedelics, and Black people by and large aren't like, we don't show up in this space in representative numbers. And in positions of leadership, it's even fewer. I've seen organizations who I've worked with for the last 3 or 4 years who, had a couple of Black people and they've cycled out and they've moved on and they have not been replaced at all. And when I'm looking around at, the larger psychedelic institutions, I really don't see Black people at the top. And so I'm wondering, in this search, maybe we don't have to speak about Black people in general, but, wouldn't it be great for MAPS to like drop a fucking bomb and disrupt everything and put like a queer Black woman at the top? Wouldn't that be, what are your thoughts about shit like that?
What I'll say,
we can get Oprah?
What I'll say, if we can get Oprah, then we're talking. What I'll say
Is Oprah queer? I'm just kidding.
Well, what I'll say is that, without giving that many more details, Betty and I have also put our names in the hat, so I actually don't have very much information about the search because I'm going through it.
Conflict of interest.
So that's all I can say for now, actually.
Okay.
But what I will say.
Then let's just talk about the thing as it is. Like, I guess we can say MAPS. Let's say MAPS in general, because I know a few Black people in positions of power. I don't know how much power they have in MAPS, but I think I'm connected with most of them in one way, shape, or form. What does MAPS see that, and does MAPS care about that?
I would say that MAPS definitely cares about that, in the sense that this is a conversation that we've been having internally since longer than it's been a public conversation. Yeah. What I like to say about MAPS is that every time we get a critique, I always think that we can critique ourselves better, because we've already been having the conversation inside for years by the time people notice, hey, that thing's happening over there. So I just say that to say that, like, I've been at the organization for 10 years. When I started, it was definitely a majority white organization. And there's a lot of factors there, which I don't need to go into. I think you guys have talked about. Like, there's a reason why most of the people who are working in the field openly 10 years ago or longer were white. Whether it's because of safety, whether it's because of wealth, whether it's because of access to privilege, access to whatever, like all of those things are factors. And I think speaking to this expansion of the field and the fact that the barrier to entry to enter the field has gotten lower. What that means is that people are generally still to some extent at risk. It's still very brave for anybody, but especially people of color, especially people who are in marginalized places, to step out and be like, I'm doing this thing that's probably illegal in the place that I live. So I want to start with that piece because I think that there's some structural factors that while did and do result in like a whiteification of the field or kind of a perception of that, I do want to recognize that there are factors that were, I think, keeping people very reasonably away from that kind of visibility for a long time. So as things have started to change, I mean, a week ago, Oprah was talking about it, you know, on the internet.
Which, for
It's
me,
wild.
It's wild, it's wild. And I say that to say that, like, and by the way, Oprah was talking about it, I'm sorry, I gotta say this. Oprah was talking about it in 2001 and invited people onto her show that kind of spread some of the early propaganda about MDMA and other psychedelics. So it's actually like, and like that is what people were saying at the time. So it's not about her who was on the show or anything. That is the arc. We're now in 2025, almost 25 years later. And what we're seeing is like, oh, actually, like not just whoever the expert was on Oprah, but also like we were all being told a story that, to your point earlier about drug education, was wrong, was full of propaganda. Suddenly we're starting to break through that. So anyway, bringing it back around to your question, I think that the expansion of the conversation, partially because of the like sober neutrality of medicine and science, has made it seem like you're not this edgy person, whatever you're doing, talking about the thing. So suddenly it's been a lot more open in my experience. And I say this as like a brown, multiracial, Muslim person of color who's been in the space since as early, you know, so I just say that to say that like, I was really lucky because when I entered the space professionally and openly, I was in law school. Yeah. I was able to say like, hey, I've got the credentials, so like I'm legit, like not like, and I'm gonna say not like, because I was just like, that was my protection. I went to law school partially to protect myself from the law, which I had had plenty of run-ins before as a young person. And I wanted to know, like, if I'm going to be subject to the system, like, I really want to know what language they're using, what they're doing, and so on. So I actually came in with that level of, like, you could say, like, educational positional privilege that when I was first invited to speak at the Drug Policy Alliance conference in 2015 in Washington, D.C., I was like the radical youth voice. I was like, so I was really lucky because I was 25 years old and I could talk openly about my past drug use because I didn't have a whole career to use. I was a student. Yeah. But I was a law student, so I could say this within the context of being like
of the law student.
Exactly. So I was able to kind of like take a little bit more of a jump before other colleagues, and I had lots of friends who are also people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, who are like wanted to do something about it, or maybe wanted to, or maybe were ready to personally, but because of their lives or their families or their immigration status or whatever, we're not willing to take that risk. That's changed in 10 years. I agree with you. There are not enough people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, at the level of leadership at New York. And compared to where we were 10 years ago, this is how I see people, like, respectfully, and this I'm not talking about y'all, but I see people come in 2 years ago, and then they're like, there's not enough people of color in the space. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. I want you to compare it to where we were 10 years ago. And I want you to look at where we are in a year and in 2 years and compare. I see things as this arc over time. And I think that what's been happening, I've only seen a trend of more leadership from people of color, more activity from people, more researchers, therapists, practitioners. I've only seen that increase. Is it enough? Absolutely not. But like, I see that change over time, and that's how I've like engaged with it. I'm like, how do we make space?
I would look at DPA as like, I mean, the trend is absolutely toward improvement. Everyone agrees, not as fast or as much as everyone thinks it deserves. But, you know, Ethan Nadelman, Rabbi's son, founded the DPA. He put a bunch of drug policy organizations together. He changed the dialogue about drug policy from being about drugs and how bad they were and whether or not they were safe and which drugs were worse to being actually about incarceration, handcuffs, destroying communities, and justice. You know, Ethan left the DPA executive director spot and put it in the hands of Cassandra, phenomenal Black woman, incredible on stage, a great leader. And we saw that at the largest national drug policy organization in the US.
Yeah, so the trend is definitely moving in
Joseph
the right direction.
McCowan, Black man in LA, is right now on the Lacos board of directors. Is they wanted specifically a person who is a therapist and therapist educator on the board. And Joseph is part of this next generation of therapist education. in the MAPS PBC days, there was a therapist of color training in Kentucky.
2019, Louisville, Kentucky, in a haunted hotel. That's a whole other story. That'll be the next
That's
one. That'll be the next one. Yeah.
And then in the
I've heard stories about
Yeah.
in the
Like I said, that's the next podcast.
in the MDMA for PTSD 3B, the second phase 3 study, the numbers among the people who were the study participants in terms of identity characteristics, the change was dramatic.
Both therapists and participants doubled from phase 2.
The effort was put in to improve, and we got improvements. So
that was a tough one because there was so much news about how white the phase 2 studies were, and then we worked really hard in between the two to shift that. And there was no news about how much better we did, and I was like, I see how it is.
But when at the beginning of Horizons, I think that we might have had one black person our first year, and it was Nick Powers. I met Nick. I remember exactly where we were. Now Nick is, speaking publicly about this. He has a book, Black Psychedelic Resolution, that just got out. He's doing his book tour. And before, if you were, a young, or for that matter, old black person and wanted a book for you and people like you about this, there was nothing. Now there are books you could
probably get some clues, and I use these graphic novels. I bet if you really read between the lines, you'd find some stuff.
But you look at where were we 10 years ago? Because I remember what it was like 20 years ago, and there is no doubt that there is improvement.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm very excited. I'm excited about this. I've never done this like this ever.
It's fun.
I'm so glad. I just assumed that you were like, because I'm not a podcast person. I respect them and stuff, but I don't listen to them. And so every time I see a clip of someone doing a podcast on the internet, I'm like, they're like this. They're sitting, and there's mics. And
sometimes they got those fancy microphones.
Sometimes they have those big fancy ones with all the sacred geometry on them, and I'm just
I have one of those.
Oh yeah, the suspension. That is kind of a look.
Yeah. So I was like, I want to do that with these guys. That would be fun. Plus, it's
talk show.
Yeah.
It's a throwback. It's we got a couch. We're on a talk show.
And it's the way that programming should have been the way programming is when it's decentralized. When we can all do it and we don't have to have X, Y, and Z studio.
People flying around the country.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's good. So this, for me, that's what I love about the time that we're in. It's that at a very high level, there are masters that own these levers of communication. But when you get to the bottom of it, is democratized. YouTube, even though it's owned by a corporation, it puts power in people like our hands, and they get paid from it now.
A lot.
Millions
I
of
know.
dollars
It's
a month,
crazy.
son.
It's crazy just from views.
The dude,
It's wild.
Oh, we're talking about the internet. Okay, content creation. I was like, who?
The dude who I started the Substack with, Matt Taibbi, he is up to, I think, 500,000 paid. Yeah.
Okay.
So I wrote a book with him, and we introduced that book to the world when Substack started. The CEOs from Substack called him, like, yo, Reg, do you want to introduce the book this way? Yes, let's do it. I think at that time we had 5,000 subscribers, and that was maybe 2016. And now he's up to 500,000 paid subscribers. Yeah, at $8 a month.
Why work for Rolling Stone?
Well, he back then he didn't want to work for Rolling Stone. He hated Rolling Stone and Substack.
It's hard to find a journalism job.
Now it's over. All the best are independent.
All right.
All right, we ready?
Get serious.
All right, folks. Bathroom break. We back. Mary, what's good?
So, what are you both looking forward to coming up for Psychedelic Science 2025? Anything that's different from last time, or new programming that you are excited about, or things that you're planning on?
Well, for one thing, when we did this last time in 2023, no one had done an event anywhere near this large in this field. We had never worked at that venue before. And we were kind of designing this on paper, being like, I wonder how this will work, and what's it going to feel like, and how people will flow through the space, and how people are we doing the proportioning right for the rooms? And this time, just having the benefit of seeing how it worked, what hit, how people flowed through the space. We just have a lot more confidence in the way we're designing the event. They have a whole new level they have built since we were there. It's done. I've walked it. That includes a 200-foot wide outdoor mezzanine, like facing the skyline and the mountain panorama. There's going to be outdoor space in Colorado sunshine, and it allows us to design the thing a way in that all of the rooms will be more navigable and clustered together. People won't have to be going all the way back and forth and out to Siberia.
I damn sure got my steps.
So,
I was thinking we would rent a fleet of scooters and just give everyone like a scooter on the way in. Like, here, this comes with your ticket. You can just kick it
here for that.
Two would love a scooter.
Oh man,
we're
I am
doing
here
more
for that.
navigation stuff. We're arranging the place in a way that it'll be less overwhelming. We're increasing lunch to 90 minutes. We're having fewer, larger blocks of group themes, so that people will feel a little less frantic there, and we're hoping it feels a little more grounded and comfortable.
Can I speak about the themes real quick? Just because I think that this kind of ties into your earlier question. And we can go into this if we want to, but just to say in very short, last year, a lot of people saw that there was a demonstration in the closing, and it was really about like the visibility of Indigenous people who were at the event, or the kind of role. And one of the things that came out in the conversation after we spoke to some of them, we spoke to other folks who were there, was that there were actually a lot of people from a variety of communities that didn't know that the other was there. And people went the entire conference not knowing that there were elders from this community or people from this place there. Even it was on the programming, but when you've got like 13 stages and like page after page after page.
Of course.
So one of the things that came up around that, not only was it that people didn't know what was going on, but there was more and more interesting stuff than people realized. So one of the things that we're going to be doing this year is pulling out, once we have the kind of agenda, is taking, thanks, Kevin is reminding me to speak a little bit more slowly, because I get
like
really
you're the one
excited.
He's so
I get really
excited.
You're supposed to be the California guy.
We get you.
We're excited here. We're an
just
excited.
like
We're an excited
drinks
group
to
here.
slow you down a little bit.
We're an
After Ramadan. Thank you. Is to have identified kind of tracks, not tracks like on a single stage, but identify who are the Black speakers at the event? Who are the Indigenous speakers at the event? What programming is most relevant for veterans? What program is most relevant for women? I'm sure you've seen it, and ideally, it'll be easy to find like tagged stuff, so it's like you can know, because that's the cool thing. It's like people are like, why didn't you have a stage that's about Indigenous topics? And I'm like, we actually have Indigenous topics on nearly every stage, maybe every single stage. Yeah. So what that means is we're trying to distribute that storytelling across these different modalities, these different disciplines. And I think that's a big part of kind of this larger question we've been having. Who's showing up to the event? What are the stories we're trying to tell? And how do we show this isn't just like, it's really important that we tell this story in this way. This is how I think about diversity and this whole conversation over the last 10 years, which everyone is like, it's really important to make sure you highlight diverse voices. I totally agree. But I think the real win is when it's not a big deal anymore that there's diverse voices everywhere. It's just been fully kind of integrated into that story. So that is how I've been thinking about it. And that's one thing I'm really excited about with the conference, because we're like, okay, how do we make sure that people know what we're really trying to do here?
Go ahead. I had a conversation on Monday morning after the 2023 at the hotel lobby with a number of Black leaders in the community. And one of the things that they just talked about was that a similar thing, especially for people who have never been to a conference before, and very few people at all have been to a conference this large before, no matter what you're normally going to, and that people feeling like they were overwhelmed, they didn't know where to find the things that would be interested in, and because there was content that was about identity, justice, Black and Indigenous and other topics distributed throughout the program, it was really hard for people to find, will I be interested in this? Yeah. Is this going to be relevant to me? And that's one of the things we are investing in this year, is making it easier for people to find what they want without feeling like they have to open a Greek diner menu, every hour to figure out where the next thing is. Because there's a running joke in my life as a conference producer that is like, you should have a stage for that. You should have a Black stage, you should have a women's stage, you should have a ketamine stage. You should, and everything that everyone is interested in, they always feel there should be a stage for fill in the blank, which because of the non-psychedelic limits of space and time, we can't have an infinite number of stages within this wonderful topic, to which there are so many interesting things and different ways of approaching it. but we're both going to have, I think, a higher quantity of ethnicity, identity, global BIPOC-related content. We're just going to have more. But I think almost more importantly, because I think there was more in 2023 than people realized, we're just trying to make it easier for people to find that. And we saw some of that organically last time, where people just started making like Google Docs and posting them on the Signal thread.
Spreadsheets, yeah. I mean, listening to the way that Izzy is describing the sectioning out, for me at least, sounds like it would be helpful.
I agree, and it's kind of a storytelling thing. It's kind of like a who's showing up thing. I mean, last year, Juneteenth fell on Monday, right?
We crushed
y'all did
Juneteenth
really good
last
event.
year. What?
Y'all did a really good event on the Monday night, and then this year Juneteenth will be on the Thursday. And we have a crew of people, led partially by my colleague Sia, who's on the policy team with me.
Pamela.
See, there's a whole crew of people, and they put together some programming. So there's one dedicated, I think that they're calling it the Black Track
This
for
year,
half
what
a
they're
day.
talking about is,
And then also have it distributed in other places as well.
is hosting an awards ceremony, which I'm down for. I'm trying to see if we can't squeeze another Juneteenth bash in there, but award ceremony for me feels good, man. I've been trying to pull some shit like that together for 2 years, and I could never make it click.
We were just joking recently about how every field at some point gets to a point where you have to have the award ceremony, right? Where you got the thing and the thing.
That's true.
And we were like, is this true? We were actually thinking about it for
Is this the year?
Yeah, like the Psychedelic Bar Association is doing a workshop. We're doing a workshop for attorneys. And we were like, have we been around for long enough to start awarding stuff to people? I don't know, maybe. When do you hit that threshold where it's like you've done enough? Well, we can just keep coming back to that.
So you did mention, though, the protest that took place.
I have two. Yeah, I have two questions.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, there's obviously a lot of things happening in the world right now, a lot of things that people are protesting right now. Do you foresee more protests happening at your event? And then also, how do you prepare for such a thing?
We might have very different answers. Do you want to go first?
For me, it's like, the way Rick handled that was very unique, and I think speaks to
My hat went off
the
to him.
values of MAPS, and that his thing was just like, yeah, if they feel it's that important,
Yeah, I know. He said let them talk.
put them up there. That we don't have a security culture or his thing was like, if it's that important to them that they want to disrupt a room with thousands of people in it, just let them speak their piece, and then we're going to move on, which we did. So I don't have an attitude about preventing protests or that our goal is to not have demonstrators. What I would just ask of everyone, because that's all you can do, is ask things of people. You can't tell people what not to do. That doesn't work real well. Is to just ask people to be mindful that this is an event with a lot of people. They're there for different reasons. They have different viewpoints. Everyone has some shared Venn diagram, like overlapping circles. But everyone we work with throughout this conference disagrees with each other over some to a lot of things, and that is okay. So when your action is something that is disrupting a large group of people, and that's a very big, important lever to pull, and to just be very, very mindful if you're going to take that step over is this worth it? Is it worth breaking a rule and disrupting things and saying who's ever on stage or whose ever time this was given to, I need to speak over that person and what they're doing. And I just encourage people to be very thoughtful. Of course, I would prefer it as the conference organizer that people not do that. As the many therapists in my life tell me, trying to persuade people of stuff, it doesn't work really well. The other thing I will also say is that, I was down there in the mix while this was happening. It was a dark auditorium loaded full of people, and the nature of the demonstration started with pounding drums and people chanting. And Rick handled it really in this kind of judo move of just bring them on stage, you give them their piece. But you have a lot of people who come to these events because they're in a difficult place. You do have people with PTSD at these events. We also work in a venue that's owned by the city of Colorado, or I think the state of Colorado. They have their own security team there that is independent of us renting the venue, and that they know that we have political leaders at the event. We had many noteworthy people, the Jaden Smiths and Aaron Rodgers, speaking at the event. And if people do something in a crowded, dark room that appears to be confrontational and disruptive, sometimes things end differently than people expect. And I just also ask if people need to express themselves, if people need to demonstrate, to do so in a way that you won't maybe trigger someone else who comes to these events because they're struggling, or give people who are just working their job at a security director at a publicly owned venue and they see these things happening and unfortunately they have to worry, are these people violent? They don't know who these demonstrators are, or that that's not obviously their goal. They don't know that. So if you're going to demonstrate, please be mindful and bear that in mind. And just remember that we're trying to create a place where everyone gets a turn, everyone gets a minute. And when everyone feels that their view and their perspective and their opinion is more important than other people and they start acting on that, the whole thing can descend and your message can get lost.
I want to say two things. Well, first, everyone gets a minute. Is that 2027? Everyone gets 1 minute?
No.
Okay,
don't,
all right,
no.
no. Just, I'm not gonna throw that in there. But I'm just like, could you imagine it just like, okay, anyway. We'll be able to accommodate almost everybody that way. Two things. One, just in general, I agree with a lot of what Kevin is saying. I also, the first thing that I thought of when that went down, and we had conversations with some of the demonstrators after, some of those have continued into more recently, and I want to respect where they're at and how that conversation is going. So I'll leave it at that for now. But we've been in some form of dialogue in the ways that we can over time. And the first thing that I thought of when all this went down, and actually Rick said this afterward when we were talking about it, is that so much of the spirit of this field began in the spirit of kind of rebellion and rejection of the things that are happening. So there's this sort of like kind of core activist thread. And I heard some people who may have been skeptical about the fact that that happened still being like, but like we still got it, you know, that the movement's still kind of like in this sort of activist spirit of being like, if something's going on, we got to interrupt it in this way. And like I think all of the practical operational considerations that Kevin mentioned are really important. And what I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of years with respect to this topic is, so just as a bit of background, like I'm mixed person. My father was born in India and raised in Pakistan, came to the United States in the 80s. My mother's Colombian. She's mestizo with African, indigenous, and European ancestry. I was born in California. I have spent my entire life being like, how do I relate to the various parts of my life and culture? And what's interesting is that the psychedelic field really confronts a lot of that, because so much of what we talk about in the field has to do with our identity, our relationship to tradition or lack thereof. And so much of this, maybe this is another whole podcast, but how we, and not me personally, but we as Americans, people who are here, relate to these medicines, these tools, these substances, these sacred, these sacraments, has a lot to do with who we are and who we're learning from and these kind of like lineages. I bring all this up because like in programming the conference, how do you say what you need to say? You all have seen this at your conference too. Like you've seen how people who are coming from different positionalities and different identities have necessarily different lenses. And to me, the kind of going back to the beginning of this conversation, this kind of like big tent, what does multidisciplinary really look like? What does it really mean to be in this kind of relationship to study? To me, when I think about these things, I'm like, we are all coming on these very complex topics through a lot of different lenses. And I think it's important that we do our best within the containers that we have to make those visible and possible to be in dialogue. The Psychedelic Science Conference isn't the place where every single conversation can happen, but it's where a lot of them can happen. And to the earlier point about how we throw events, like I think that there are conversations, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot in the programming, that need to build into what they need to build toward their time to shine. In other words, like I'm constantly hearing of like new threads of conversations. This happened a lot in Oakland. After decriminalization in Oakland, there were conversations that were happening about like substance analysis and quality control in the underground, partially led by you and your colleagues and the people that are around us, that like took years before they were like coherent enough to say, this is the standard of practice that we should do. Otherwise, it was just people doing so. I say that to say that we're kind of on these arc with these different themes. And I think that because we have the internet, because we're all in so much more connection than we've ever been, we have more visibility on some of those things than we've ever had. And I think my question is, for a container like the conference, for like the Psychedelic Science Conference, like when is something ready for an audience that's coming from all these different places with all their own baggage, all their own history, their own lens? It's not a perfect science, but it's a little bit of an art to figure out like when are things ready for that point.
I mean, I think to your point, the best events that I've ever thrown have been the ones where I have tapped the community entirely and drawn from community's inspiration and from shit that matters to them. I've done both, where it's all come from my head, and those have been good too.
Fine, like
But like my best work. And so, I think the answer to your question is you guys are doing it at least in terms of tapping the community for their inspiration and their thoughts, and then giving them space, giving some people, some ideas, space to be expressed on stage.
Can I say one more thing about that? And why I think it's possible that Psychedelic Science 2025 is our best work, because it's responding to what's happening with the community, is that one thing that's come up a lot in what goes on stage is, again, this kind of expansion and shift in the conversation. 2023 was the first massive event that we did, and we were like, we really have to represent these certain things to the extent, with whatever limitations we have with the time that we have. One thing I've been thinking about a lot is that people are coming in new to this field all the time. We need there's a sort of level of like baseline 101 level education, and then there's like, what's the next conversation and the next conversation.
Yeah.
So one thing I've been thinking about a lot is balancing and how to balance making sure that there's places for people to go who are brand new, who are fascinated because they're coming from one field or another. And then also for those of us that have been having some versions of the conversation for a long time,
the same.
where does that does it happen here in this big space, or does it happen somewhere else? So just from like a storytelling perspective, I think about that a lot. There's this sort of feeling in a lot of movements that new people come in and they're like, I don't know, they don't really know, they're kind of new. And I'm like, the psychedelic field and drug policy broadly has been spending years saying, if only more people would listen to us and be part of our movement, and then all these people show up and they're like, I don't know if you're legit. So I think that we have to have these kind of funnels, these points of entry for people who are interested from any perspective. And again, about meeting people where they're at. I am all about the critical analysis, and I can get into that critical theory as much and as long as anybody wants. Truly, I will go there with you. And I think related to this conversation, I also like to think about how to invite people into those conversations without scaring them away, because if you push people past that comfort zone, then you lose them, and then they're not going to come back.
Absolutely.
So I'm like, to me, it's like, how do we stay in relationship? It's like what you're saying about politics.
And
how do we stay in relationship?
how do you have difficult conversations? Can you?
Is that the name of this podcast?
Difficult conversations.
That's the name of this phase in my life. Difficult conversations.
Difficult conversations.
But it feels good. What I've learned,
if you can get through it.
If you can get past the anxiety of having a difficult conversation, it generally feels good on the other end. Like, damn, all right, we worked that shit out. I'm not mad. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This person wasn't the person I thought they were reading social media posts.
Oh,
yeah.
Totally.
People, and it's humanizing.
Totally.
And it's very important.
Yes.
But another thing I want to, just get into here is that communities about ethnicity, identity, race, nationality, they're not monoliths, and I talk to a lot of the Black leaders in the community, and some of them are Black scientists, Black psychiatrists, Black therapists who really want to make psychedelic medicine available to people like them, get Medicaid, Medicare reimbursement, and they see that as being the pathway to help Black people like them. You have other people who really believe that there should not be gatekeepers and that this professionalized system stands in the way of people just having access to these things that they feel is a birthright and comes from the earth. And so all of those people are Black leaders trying to do things for Black communities. But even there, you see that there is a little overlap, but there's actually a lot of disagreement. I just think it's a better world when those people will be in the same room with each other, and they'll feel like if they disagree, they can disagree in a way that's polite, respectful, intellectual, understands the humanity in each other, and let, the audience figure out what resonates with them and which pathway they're attracted to, which the more time people spend in this community also often changes over time. people come in through one doorway and then they find another one.
I came in through cultivation, and here I am.
Not a
I came in on a
static
spaceship.
I'm
just
leaving on a stage.
Yeah, totally.
the
Same.
politics of the native world and the indigenous world, it is complicated and complex
Absolutely.
and rich in a
Absolutely.
multidisciplinary multiverse of ways. And you have tribes and nations where the medicine is completely sacred. It can only be used in certain rituals by certain people for certain purposes. You can never let money anywhere near it. You have other very long-running indigenous traditions where they use the medicines for all sorts of stuff, or to which the exchange of funds with the healer or for the material can be considered permissible. The native and indigenous world is both fascinating, beautiful, and the just tapestry of humanity and the different customs, traditions, societies, and it is phenomenally complicated. And there is not one native community. There is not one indigenous community. And as a non-native person producing an event mostly populated by non-native people
In
for
a place where
non-native
native
audience,
politics is popping right now.
Oh my gosh.
we have to be just very careful, and we have groups of allies that we work with, and we take their advice and guidance. And one of the things we don't hear from them is that, well, we think every panel and everything needs to have native people on it talking about how other people who are non-native can use the secrets of native traditions and integrate them into everyone else. A lot of them are actually like, what you guys are doing is very different from what we do in our community, and the only thing we want to talk about is decolonization and how you guys can stop hurting people in our community with appropriation, with sometimes literally wrapping yourselves in the fabrics of our people. And that is most of the content we have had and will have at Psychedelic Science on the topic of indigeneity. It's less about how you can learn from the practices we've developed and you can consume it and offer it to your therapy clients. And it's more about, we want you to understand what it would be in right relationship. That's what we're focused on, and in 2023 what we had, and in 2025 what we're going to do again. And we just have to be really careful. We have a non-native audience, we have a non-native organization. There's tremendous hunger in the audience for indigenous and native content. And there is an element of that that is kind of like a fetish for native stuff by non-native people.
I know how it is, yo, like
And
hip-hop.
what we're hoping it can do is people can understand the ways in which you need to start by asking what is actually best for those communities. Like, how do I understand that it's not necessarily for me to take from someone else's ritual, tradition, customs, things? But that's not what a lot of people think they're signing up for.
No,
I think there's a lot of, I think that's a whole nother conversation in the community, and a big one, you know. So I'm looking, and we set some time out for this talk, and we could keep doing it. I have ideas that are already popping in my head, but Mary, did you have any, let's call it one for the road?
Okay, I've got a fun one. So I remember last time when I was doing my interviews, just kind of talking to people for our story that went up on Hyphae Leaks, that I was asking about programming and asking about different things that y'all were offering. And I think I looked at my notes and I wrote down puppy room. And I wrote, I don't know, like.
I can tell you about
I don't know the status of the puppy room.
So, okay, you guys had a puppy room.
They didn't have to be puppies. I
Okay,
mean,
so
mature
dog
dogs
room.
are.
Okay, well, I wrote down puppy room,
No.
but dog room.
Yeah.
Love that you had that. Okay, so can you explain what that is, and also will it be back, and how do we get there?
Yeah. So this community has a lot of people who come to these things because they are or have been struggling or suffering, and that they need to find something that will, depending on your lens, improve your mental health or your spiritual well-being. And we have a lot of people with therapy dogs, service animals, in particular the veteran community, where there's been a lot of PTSD, but also just all sorts of other people who come to this topic for healing. A lot of service animals, a lot of therapy dogs. So it started with us needing to create an area where people could go with their dog or watch each other's dogs And it did turn into kind of like a poorly kept secret that there was this room full of therapy dogs you could just go to and meet service animals and therapy dogs.
Yeah.
We don't have
All of them have do not pet on their side. You're like, oh man, like,
But you're just
it's like
in there.
purgatory, surrounded by dogs. And just
So we are again we are finding a place in the venue where people who have service animals and therapy dogs can go, and how we can offer that to the rest of the event. It's not we don't have a complete plan on it yet.
Okay.
But at the Colorado Convention Center, I think they do like events with horses and stuff there. So they didn't even bat an eyelash at this.
I love that.
But yes, there was a poorly kept secret therapy dog room, and there will be one again.
I was thinking about it the entire time, and I was like, how do I make my way to the I kept calling it the puppy room, and I kept telling others that there was a puppy room. I'm like, there's a puppy room here. Got to get to the puppy room.
Well, they're
hard-hitting journalism. You're like, I gotta find the secrets. I'm gonna uncover the secrets.
Exactly.
this conversation, during this conversation, is going so well, and I'm sitting here like, will there be a room for media? Have you guys considered a space where folks like us might be able to set up, and because everybody's going to be there?
There will for sure be press rooms. For sure, for sure.
Put in your press request now. That's definitely something we're doing.
All right, let's put it in. All right.
I had my first interview with Fox News at Psychedelics Nights 2023.
Whoa.
Looked like in full like middle of the week.
How did it come out on the other side?
Honestly, I never looked because I don't even know if it got published because I when that week was over, I was like,
Crazy
whatever happened, good luck, you guys. I'm out.
Crazy Muslim in Colorado.
I'm wearing like
advocating
a
drugs.
suede cowboy hat with a peyote button on the front. Like I was like, all right, let's see how this goes. Like,
Wild.
Oh, man. Oh, shit. Yeah. I guess if Fox News is giving folks roles, or if Fox News is giving folks time, then we are in a new day. And I think that's a good note for us to conclude on. I appreciate both of you for taking the time to come here and sit down. Izzy, this was your idea. We brought it together. Everybody's moving at light speed.
We almost did this on the internet.
We almost did this.
And I was like, we're all gonna be together.
This is
in
the
10
new
days.
format.
Let's do
An
this.
hour before
saying
we
it now.
Izzy put the call in, and we switched, and this works out. Do you guys have anything that you'd like to say to the folks in conclusion?
Yeah, thanks for being, patient with us. Like the history of psychedelics in America outside the Native American Church, which is the largest psychedelic society in the world. But it has been muy blanquito. It has been primarily affluent, white, often male in its history. And that's what we started working with and where organizations like this come from. But we are working as best as we're able to try to make it accessible and available for all people who are interested in this, who want healing, who want inspiration, who want to find out what's behind that door in a safe and responsible way. And no one is going to be showing up at Psychedelic Science, feeling like they're at the NAACP conference. And I want to make that clear. There are things we can do. There are things we can't do.
Colorado and we won't be confused.
But we want to create the dialogues and the spaces for both people of color and other people to understand what this topic looks like and feels like, what these conferences and events and communities feel like for people who are different than one another, and get them to meet each other, talk to each other, and very importantly, make it so that the next generation of leadership feels like they can see themselves on these stages, at these events, running these organizations, because it's something that there's not a kind of person this is for. It should be for everyone who has the interest and everyone who wants healing and everyone to learn and everyone to share.
I think the last thing that I would say, maybe 2 points. One is about the expansion of the field and the fact that all these new projects are coming out and coming through. And I've been thinking a lot about harmonization and how we're not talking about, and this is kind of what Kevin was saying earlier, people have seen the story of MAPS as being really focused on the medical use because that was part of the strategy, that was part of the story. When in fact, and especially more and more, there's been this more capacity to be open about that larger, the different points of entry, the different ways that people engage with this. I really see it more of a spectrum where like it's kind of like a baton pass. Like some people need that super hardcore medical system because they really need that kind of support. You can kind of baton pass to the regulated system that's a little bit more flexible, has a little bit more room for people, maybe with fewer contraindications or comorbidities. Baton pass to the community use. For some people, you just need to be in a relationship with your family and friends, and that's enough. Baton pass to like some people just need to be alone in a dark room. with 5 grams. So I say that to say that, like, when we're talking about the future, I really think about the harmonization between these different things. Not harmony like we all get along, we're all gonna, but harmony like this is one bigger story. So that's one thing.
And it's okay to not agree. It is okay, profoundly okay,
It's healthy.
to spend time with people who do not agree with you.
Totally. It's healthy.
Exactly. I think that's one. And then the other has a little bit more to do with, I forgot it. Let's go.
Well, let me just jump in and just button all this harmony conversation up. Yeah, I do think it's okay to disagree. I think that it's okay to have questions. One of the things that is unique about what happened here, what we've been doing now for a few years is, at Hyphae Leaks, we had questions. And we reached out to you guys with the questions and, had a respectful conversation. And hopefully we tried to serve as an intermediary for anybody else who might not just have your number, live, down the street from either of you. And as community leaders who have been in it for almost 20 years and 10 almost years, you didn't run from it. And so I think that is the theme that I've heard from the beginning of this conversation all the way through when we park it here is that, you guys are open to having a conversation. You're open to trying to, serve as kind of like the center point for the community and doing the best that you can. And, whatever you don't get right this year, you'll get right in 2027. I want to conclude by saying last year, I don't go to conferences other than my own, really, and I went to his. And it's hard to find me out the house. You can't just stumble upon me in Oakland unless you're Izzy driving down High Street. But this is something that I went to last year, stepped out of my comfort zone and really went to all 16,000 people. And it was worth it. If you're at all interested in, I don't care what you think about MAS as an organization, really don't. But in terms of the event as a professional or community building opportunity, to stand on business and miss it, I think you shoot yourself in the foot. That's what I'll say personally. This is not a commercial. They didn't pay me for this. This is just my personal experience from last year. I'll be there. Mary will be there.
I'll be there.
These two will be there.
I'll be there in 3 places at once. We'll be
The hologram, Izzy.
we'll be jumping the
good.
time-space continuum.
The parties are good. And
It's not it's not all presentations. People are having a good time out there.
And the parties are good.
And
The parties are very
there
fun.
might be a secret puppy room.
Then there might be a
And
secret
there might
program.
be a secret puppy room.
Yo, we will holler at y'all, man. Again, shout out to Izzy behind the counter. Shout out to my man Evan behind the camera who shot the whole thing. Both of them are from Table of Our Own. Yo, thank y'all.
Big shout
We'll
out
see
to
y'all
Reggie.
there.
Big shout out to
Reggie and
Mary.
Mary.
Thank you,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you,
you guys
thank
so
you,
much.
thank you,
Peace,
thank
y'all.
you.
See you in the Mile High City.